Today, hope is the worst of all evils.
Oh, come on!
Dark Deeds in Last Hope is a starter adventure for the Shadow of the Demon Lord role-playing game, and was written by the game's writer and designer, Robert J. Schwalb. It is one of the most highly praised and popular starter adventures for Demon Lord, and I'll be offering some tips on how to run it better. I need to do a slight digression about what attracted me to Shadow of the Demon Lord. A few years back, I was getting a bit fatigued with how the only fantasy RPG I was running and playing was Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition by Wizards of the Coast. It just seemed that D&D was taking up all of my previously varied fantasy diet and leaving me a bit unsatisfied. Now, when 5th edition had first launched in 2014, it had been extremely welcome. It was serving up a streamlined, crowd-friendly experience with broad appeal, and hell yeah, I jumped on board. I had missed playing D&D, and it was a lot easier to get games launched with D&D than my attempts at the time to push stuff like the Dragon Age RPG from Green Ronin. I bought all the 5th edition books, or at least the early ones, and my lovely mum even bought me a couple of pairs of the official socks. But it became increasingly apparent that with 5th edition, I was missing out on some of the things I really hunger for in my fantasy roleplay, specifically darkness, grit, and persistent danger for characters. Shadow of the Demon Lord by Schwalb Entertainment shook me out of my funk. Schwalb Entertainment's founder, Robert J. Schwalb, knows his fantasy roleplay. He worked for Wizards of the Coast on multiple editions of D&D, including 5th edition. But he's also worked in other dark fantasy settings, such as for Warhammer Fantasy by Cubicle 7. And with Shadow the Demon Lord, Schwab's made a D&D style game that isn't a reimagining of past editions like Old School Essentials by Necrotic Gnome or Castles and Crusades by Troll Lord Games. Fantastic as those games are, Demon Lord is its own evil creature. It's mixed and matched reliable mechanics from various sources, old and new. It evokes the experience of old school D&D while being a completely fresh, modern, and smooth game system for present day GMs to run. And it's all packaged up in a setting that's straight out of like the heaviest metal fantasies. It's rife with horrors and an all-powerful being, the eponymous Demon Lord, that is slowly dragging the world into darkness. Now, with all that established, starter adventures means something slightly different in the context of Shadow of the Demon Lord. In the game, you are the underdog in a very doomed land. Characters do not start as level 1 paladins, warlocks, or druids. They begin at level 0 as merchants, farmers, butchers, bakers, candlestick makers. Normal people just living their lives. Now, some of you might recognize a similar theme from Dungeon Crawl Classics by Goodman Games. That also has characters start as commoners. But what makes Demon Lord stand apart is how it builds a class-based layer cake of advancement on top of that simple origin. At level 0, players are just an empty plate of their profession, their ancestry, and life story. It's only at level 1 that players will add their first real layer to this cake, taking a novice class out of only 4 choices. That's Rogue, Magician, Warrior, and Priest, the classic D&D quartet. Players advance exactly 1 level per adventure, and they gain benefits at each level. But at hitting 3rd level, they will add another layer to that cake, picking an expert class from a much larger list of more epic titles like Assassin, Sorcerer, Berserker. When they eventually advance to level 7, they'll add yet another masterclass from an even bigger list of even more awesome titles, building, as I say, this beautiful 3-tier layer cake of their design.
Welcome to the layer cake, son.
But at the end of the day, all of this cake still sits on the plate of your level 0 character, that simple commoner. Even at level 10, your background of being Ted the sheep farmer, long before you were Ted Axelon the rogue assassin infiltrator, can provide crucial bonuses to a role, or key bits of information to survive sheep-related circumstances.
Oh no.
That experience of playing an adventure as a simple peasant gives you, your eventual hero, a foundation. Without that plate in place, the layer cake is just a splat of skills and bonuses. But it is during the starter adventure that you take these ordinary people out of their depth to overcome adversity and reveal their true calling. And Dark Deeds and Last Hope is without a doubt the recommended starter adventure for most GMs running Demon Lord. But what is this module actually about? Let's get to the plot.
Halt, adventurer, journey no further, for the secrets that will be revealed cannot be unlearned. Turn back now, or face your doom.
The party are residents of the village of Last Hope, a dump on the edge of the wilderness. Walking past the village temple one evening, they come upon a man named Edgar, screaming that he was attacked by a mud monster. In reality,
previously,
Edgar was stealing a holy relic from the temple, was caught by the priest, Father Solomon, and stabbed him, which is when Father Solomon turned into a mud monster. That's because
previously,
this was not Father Solomon. It was actually a changeling called Muck, and Muck had been pretending to be Father Solomon until they got stabbed. That's because
previously,
Muck had killed Father Solomon, who had caught them stealing bodies from the graveyard. They were bringing the bodies to their friend in the woods because
previously,
Muck's friend Adelmar is actually the mayor's son, who has been away studying in magic school. That's where he met Muck while they were disguised as a hottie. But after being kicked out of grimdark Hogwarts, Adelmar came home to perform necromantic spells on corpses.
And now, the conclusion.
Back to the now, the party will find the relic missing, and a bunch of muddy footprints leading from the temple outside. At this point, the party might do a bunch of things. Investigate the graveyard, find the relic hidden on Edgar, visit the local constable, or they could go to the pub. But they'll likely eventually go to the woods. In the woods, they'll find a dead lumberjack. Then they'll come to a camp, where they'll possibly meet Muck, disguised as said dead lumberjack. Or they'll find no one, and they'll possibly fight a zombie that Adelmar raised, or they'll just fight a pack of rats. Before following more tracks leading further into the woods, they'll find Adelmar, either being paranoid by himself, or kidnapped by monstrous goatmen, at which point you kill the goatmen, and rescue Adelmar, returning to Last Hope as heroes. Well, unless you didn't arrest Edgar as the thief, or know the local jail was full of his gang, or fix the lock of their cell, and now the town is being rampaged by the gang. But even then, if you kill all the gang, now you are heroes. Dark Deeds and Last Hope takes place fittingly in the village of Last Hope. This is a really big strength for new players. Other starter adventures kick off with players as prisoners in a slave caravan, or in an active chase from bandits. And while those are both really thrilling intros, they can be a bit intense for newbies to grasp quickly. In contrast, the local village is a relatable area to anyone to have a frame of reference for, and it provides an idea of an established safe place and an instinctual need to protect it. So what could be better than having your players be a part of Last Hope's creation? Look! Here in the adventure module, is a guide for creating the town together at random. How helpful! No! Don't do that. Now, before I say why, I want to put on the record that this random village generation method that's listed here is ridiculously cool, and definitely something I want to use in more games. To generate Last Hope, the adventure asks for a player to grab a d20 and a bunch of 6-sided dice, to hold them over a piece of paper and to let them go. Each die landing spot gets marked on the map as a building. The d20 marks the location of Last Hope's temple, and all the d6s denote various buildings depending on what side they land. Players are even encouraged to think of businesses that take up some of the generic business slots. Now, this is brilliant. It's fun, it's engaging, it makes the town unique, but here are some quibbles I have for using it for Last Hope. First off, this is a starter module, the starter module really. You want to hit the ground running with gameplay for new players who will likely be completely unfamiliar to this system or role-playing maybe, and they probably just spend a heap of time creating characters with you. Now you're spending even more time making them plot out this village when you want to be getting them into the game. Another reason not to use a random layout is it's not particularly helpful for this story, which really has a few key locations in the village that you don't want landing right next to each other or in the wrong spot by chance. You probably don't want the temple accidentally placed smack in the middle of the village or next to the constable's office. If you want it to make sense that someone is secretly stealing bodies from the graveyard next to it, which should be isolated. In addition, you probably do want the temple to be at the edge of the woods to make sense of following Muck's muddy footprints into the woods. What's more, it's not just where the dice drop that's an issue, but what dice even come up. With this system, you're assured a temple will be there because of the d20, but it only wants the tavern to come up with a 5 and the constable office on a 4. What if you roll none of these? What if you roll no 4s and no 5s? Well, you can do it again, but that takes the oomph out of things. Similarly, what if your player is a tradesman, and by bad luck, no 3s come up for a place of their work? Frankly, you can even forego having a physical map at all. If you still do want a map, just draw one out in advance. Or even simpler, use a generator like the fantastic Whataboo's ProcGen Arcana, and just allow players to claim buildings from that map as their home and place of work when you show it to them. There's no reason for players to get attached to Last Hope, because ideally, they won't be staying. Last Hope is described as a nowhere town, full of nobodies, like your player characters, with nothing good near it. And that suits a starter adventure really well. You are the nobodies. However, after the starter adventure, two things change. The characters gain classes, and the players need quests. Now, regarding the classes, it's strongly implied that once the adventure ends, the characters undergo special training for their first level in their chosen classes. And Last Hope isn't really where that kind of training is available. At the beginning of the adventure, the only priest in town dies, and during the adventure, the only trained fighter in town likely dies. The place is so small, there's not going to be a crime lord to learn from for rogues, and there's no wizard tower to speak of, and you probably killed the last wizard in town. That's sort of the whole point. When shit goes down in Last Hope, your players are the only people available to step up. They're not heroes yet. While a GM could hand wave away this kind of narrative fluff element of leveling, it feels pretty important in this setting. Your characters have grown too big for this town. They've handled a horrible situation, and they've come out the other side changed people. In a world of nobodies that is increasingly looking damned, these player characters stand a chance as somebodies. The other issue, the need for player quests, is a problem as well. Last Hope is the ass end of nowhere. The starter adventure was likely the most exciting thing to happen to these townsfolk in years. It's a lot easier to drop hooks to either the published adventures or your own homebrews when player characters reside in a larger established town. All of this is why I think it's integral that at the end of Dark Deeds at Last Hope, you voice out an epilogue about why the characters ended up leaving, heading to a bigger town to carve out their fate. Now, before everyone goes choo-choo and shouts railroad, I hear you. But let's make things clear. This is the starter adventure. It's the prologue. This is the pre-campaign. You are not going to be deciding the choices of your players like this ever again. If you're worried about that kind of railroad reaction, I would just add a few lines when you start the adventure that this is exactly that, a prologue. And when you finish your why they had to leave epilogue, top it off with something like,
And so it was that the simple villagers from Last Hope found themselves transported to the bustling metropolis of Sixton, and it is here where their true story as heroes would begin.
And the exact why of that can be based on what they did. So, situation 1, they took the finger, didn't return it, or Edgar got away with the finger. Astrid's finger is the central binding part of the community, and if it isn't returned, the party are likely going to be facing a lot of suspicion. Maybe the Inquisition is called in, and if not driven out of town, the players are likely to be shunned into leaving for its disappearance. There's situation 2. Adelmar died. You know, if Adelmar dies due to the players' inaction or action, the mayor is going to be pissed. He'll definitely find a way to kick them out for that. Situation 3, Adelmar didn't die. Maybe your party were just rude to Adelmar. Maybe your party killed or imprisoned Muck. Maybe Daddy the Mayor just doesn't want anyone who knows what his son was doing. Whatever the case, the mayor steps in and makes leaving the best option for them. Situation 4, there's bad vibes. The adventure is called Dark Deeds for a reason. At the end of the adventure, people have died. And the town is now coming to terms with the fact that monsters are a direct problem for them. The setting of the game takes place in superstitious times, and your player characters could now just be seen as harbingers of bad tidings. Then the townsfolk just want them gone. One last reason why I like making the player characters leave Last Hope at the end is so they can eventually come back to Last Hope as totally unrecognizable badasses. The simple townsfolk will be in awe that Dave the Dung Gatherer is now a sorcerer supreme. For that return, by the way, I strongly recommend using the adventure Suffer None to Live, which is about saving a town totally overrun with beastmen. It works particularly well because it reflects the escalating nature of the Demon Lord Shadow, where once was a small nuisance of these guys, is now a horde. When it comes to character ancestries, the adventure text does say to narrow these to what would be in a small town in this world. And I agree. I agree so much that I believe that if this is one of the first games of Demon Lord you're ever running, the available list should be even tighter. Specifically, there's 2 ancestries I'd advise ruling out for a table of newbies, and they are Clockworks and Changelings. Clockworks and Changelings are awesome, but they both have complexities to their mechanics that may be hard for new Shadow of the Demon Lord players to get a handle on if you just want them to dive in. The Changeling reveal in this first ever story is also slightly dampened if there is already a Changeling in town. I would say to narrow ancestry choices down to humans, dwarves, goblins, orcs, and as a bonus, halflings, which aren't in the core rulebook, but they are in the expansion splat document Uncommon Courage, which is all about halflings. I bring up the expansions because whether you listen to me or if you go,
"To hell with you, Boosty, I'll let them play as any of the ancestries in the rulebook,"
which you are totally in your rights to do, my big advice on character creation for your starter adventure is to find out what ancestries your players are going to play and to get the splat document for that ancestry.
hell is even that?
Each of these texts is great for some extra setting-specific background info, but more importantly, they take that random life path character experience of what your character's life was so far and supercharges it. For example, in the core book, you have one lovely table for whatever freaky anatomical feature your goblin character could have. In the splat document, Snot and Stitches, you may have to roll for multiple oddities, and there are full tables for noses, eyes, hands, ears, feet, mouths, arms, legs, growths, skin, hair, and even odor. There are full tables for fleshing out a character its entirety, from what their family situation is to what brushes with death they've already had. I'm a big fan of rolling characters randomly in general, and each of these splat documents is well worth the few dollars on DriveThruRPG to produce some wonderfully unique creations. My players said that they had just as much fun doing this for the first hour as they did actually playing. To cap it off, my favorite entry from the Goblin Life Path under the section Minor Setbacks is, "You swallowed something foul and gained a tapeworm as a result. You named it Frank. Aww." Your players have likely made an oddball assortment of townsfolk. Getting them together at the beginning can be a little strange. And if only there was a place where an adventure could start that is the central meeting place in a town. That's right, the tavern. Okay, calm down. We are not starting the adventure in a tavern. Not because doing so is bad. I think starting adventures in a tavern is perfectly brilliant, wonderful. The reason we won't start in a tavern is because the adventure starts with Edgar bursting out the doors of the temple. I like to start this adventure by saying that the soon-to-be party members were all just arriving at sundown at the Ribald Reeve Tavern, waiting for it to open, but were immediately met at the front door by the stern face and words of the proprietor, Mercurio Blanche. She says that no one in town is being allowed into the tavern until your bunch of commoners go and help the local carpenter lift and cart her new table over from his workshop. She won't reveal why her existing table was smashed. She'll just say that there was trouble the other night. GMs will recall that Edgar's goons smashed up the bar a few days ago, and so will any player with the correct rumor. But why do this? Well, now, instead of aimlessly wandering around the town and coming upon the temple, the characters are now walking alongside the cart of the town carpenter,
Old Tom!
The party is helped lift the heavy table onto Tom's cart and are walking back to the pub so they can lift the table off there and get in and have some enjoyment for the evening. You've already established by doing this that the town is a small community where people know each other, and the Ribald Reeve Tavern is the only place for socializing in this dump. You've also hinted that there was some odd activity happening at the Ribald Reeve recently, but the purpose of all of this also extends to Old Tom himself. Instead of just saying, "You're walking and bam, the temple doors open," you can begin the session walking along with Old Tom, riding on his cart, engaging in mildly annoying conversation related to your player characters' backstories and the town.
"So, young Jeff, how's your father's turnip farm coming along? Is it all right with, just the two of you running the place since your mother passed?"
Those few moments can further ground the players with way less time and effort than that detailed map malarkey. And it provides a big shock when, as he starts jabbering us,
"Oh, I remember when they first built this temple and, brought the finger here to rest,"
that suddenly the door, burst opens and the old man's chatter is interrupted by Edgar screaming for help. Once the players grab Edgar as well, Old Tom has one last part to play. Old Tom can name drop that, there's the constable who they can report this to, this mud monster. They can also voice concern for Father Solomon and the Finger. Old Tom saying the town would do anything to make sure, him and the Finger are safe. By doing this, you've reminded the group that, there's only one law in town, the constable, and provided stakes for why any of this bears investigating, why it means anything. After this, Tom can sod off. I mean, he's no real help with this sort of thing. He's very old.
Real old Tom!
Having served his purpose, old Tom will excuse himself to ride his cart the rest of the way to the tavern. That is, unless your party tells Edgar to ride with him back alone, in which case, old Tom will soon be
Dead Tom!
In any case, thanks to old Tom, your players are better set up to get on with the mystery, but they also have a reason to give a crap about the mystery. Most of the pre-made adventures for Shadow of the Demon Lord are intentionally slim, like a lot of old school adventure modules. The upside to this is it minimizes the file size of them, the price, the reading time. The downside is that there are a lot of gaps that you as a GM need to fill in, and this one is no exception. First off, maps. Except for the town building guide, there are no maps. Now, this is mostly fine since most of the combat just happens in the woods, but one place you'll want to map out in advance, just for your own reference, is the temple. The description in the text, especially for the back rooms, makes some sense after reading it a few times, but when you first just describe it out loud, it can be a little bit hard to follow the geography. I've actually provided my own incredibly rubbish maps for Roll20 below, which includes a version of the graveyard with the graves covered and uncovered. It's not just the settings that are a little lacking for easy reference. The layout all over this adventure is a little funky. Some characters get dedicated bios, but other ones get mixed up with the locations they're linked to, or they get put into the event guide. So you probably want to just write out a short list of names for the townsfolk and other characters. Put a couple of bullet points for each. Start with the mayor, good old mayor. Good old mayor.
Who's that Pokemon?
That's right, the mayor doesn't have a name. We can assume his last name is Klemp, the same as his son, Edelmar Klemp, but we don't know the mayor's first name, or the name of his wife, if she's dead or alive. We also don't know Father Solomon's first name. We don't know the names of any of the thugs in the jail, or the name of the dead woodcutter, who is going to be a local and perhaps one of your players know if they work in an adjacent trade. You don't need to have files on the whole town, but these specific people are part of the story and you should be able to at least name them at a glance. Frankly as well, I would also suggest renaming Edelmar. There are two big instigators of this mystery, and they are Edelmar and Edgar. Your players will get these two names mixed up. Keep Edgar, it's a shifty name, but rename Edelmar to something else. It's just too similar. I don't know. Call Edelmar Bob. And speaking of Bob, on the subject of Bob, the adventure is extremely fuzzy on a crucial plot point. Why did he come all the way back home to then just set up in the woods and raise zombies? I'm going with a classic. Bob's mother died, and Bob now hopes to bring her back. You know that zombie who can emerge from the tent at his camp? The zombie that was specifically so frightening that somehow it made him run away even though he's been raising all these zombies? That's Mama. The raising didn't go right, and it freaked Bob out seeing her like that. When she comes for the group, mention how this zombie is dressed in a really fine dress and costume jewelry to loot, why not? But also mention, if they examine her, how her skin has a waxy leather looking quality from all the preservatives, unlike the other rotting test corpses in the tents. This change also helps explain why the mayor might suddenly turn up in town. The mayor arrives if the adventurers come back to town empty-handed, and the mayor's saying, "Find my son!" But there's not much reason the mayor would even know Bob's even in trouble at that exact moment. Bob's been living in the woods, but let's say Bob took his mother out the mausoleum earlier that day, and his father's only just discovered that the mausoleum's been broken into. Perhaps the mayor will ride into town to find him, clutching a signed note left in the crypt, saying, "You let her go. I'll bring her back." Giving Bob a mission doesn't just tie up these loose ends, it gives him a purpose. It makes him somewhat sympathetic, if in a creepy way, while also giving him a pretty good villain origin story if the players smash up what's left of his mum's corpse. You know, bottom line, it means the players will be more inclined to listen to anyone's pleas to rescue him, like Muck for instance. If Muck is even at the camp, of course, which is my last point to address. Dark Deeds and Last Hope, as written, has some time-sensitive elements at play. If the party follows the trail directly to the camp, Muck is at the camp, and so is the zombie. If the party goes to the constable's office, however, before going to the camp, Muck isn't there, Muck's gone, but the zombie is there. And if the party hangs out a while in town any longer than that before going to the camp, Muck is gone, the zombie is gone, and there's just a bunch of rats. This choice actually extends outwards. If the party does find Muck at the camp, Muck will lead them on to Bob, who's on his own, being angsty. But if the party doesn't find Muck at the camp, that's when you get the chance to follow the tracks to find Bob being hung up by a pack of beastmen. This kind of cause and effect sounds really cool, and there are plenty of scenarios I love that incorporate, big plot changes based on the order of actions taken by players. However, its implementation in this adventure is a little wonky, and it doesn't add anything to the adventure really except problems. My first problem is that the time-sensitive mechanic feels arbitrary. The players have no real way of knowing if and how the choices actually affect Muck's whereabouts or Bob's status. Only the GM is arbitrarily keeping track of this, and it's pointlessly punishing the players with this lack of information. Them taking Edgar to the constable is just as rational as following the trail into the woods immediately, but taking Edgar results in a lost scene with Muck. My second problem with this time-sensitive mechanic is that it chops out crucial plot information. Muck is key to this story. They are the mud monster. They killed the priest. They've been stealing bodies, but crucially, they didn't steal the finger. If the party turn up at the camp and Muck is not there, there's no other source of any of that information. It means there's no conclusion to what's going on. The players have to wind up in front of Muck if they want something approaching a satisfying narrative. Even if they don't ask Muck a single question and they just attack this woodcutter on sight, at least they'll know that they've dealt with the shape-shifting mud monster because they'll turn into one when they die. My third problem with the time-sensitive mechanic is it just results in lamer outcomes. Let me ask, which is cooler? Finding a ravenous zombie and a mysterious changeling with secrets to hide? Or just finding a ravenous zombie? Or just finding a bunch of rats?
Correct!
You want that encounter. It's the best one. And which of these is cooler? Bob hanging from a tree as monstrous goatmen howl around him, taunting their upcoming meal? Or Bob being emo alone in the woods?
That is correct.
Let's just forget this whole arbitrary time mechanic. Muck and the zombie should always be at the camp, and Bob should always be dangling, ready to be eaten. And the mayor should always be in town to greet the party when they head back from the woods. Now, there is one time factor element I do say to keep in play, and that's those thugs, the thugs in the jail cells, who will break out by midnight if the lock isn't fixed. The reason why I say to keep this time element is that unlike Muck, at the camp, or the Beastmen, your players have an actual fair chance of knowing the thugs are in the jail from a couple of sources. A player could have the marshal rumor that there are thugs in the jail, or the players could visit the constable and find the thugs there. especially after old Tom mentions the constable as someone to report Edgar's mysterious mudman to. So if all hell breaks loose and there's thugs are burning down the town, players probably have some understanding of what is happening and why. Hell, even if they don't, the thugs can just fill in some of the blanks with shouting. If Edgar's missing, they can yell,
Edgar, where are you, you cheap bastard? We want the finger or our money.
But if Edgar is with them, they can say,
Edgar, you beautiful bastard, we're gonna come out of this job rich.
In conclusion, the players don't always have to get the best outcome. The dice will see to that. But they should understand and better enjoy the scenarios presented. Thank you for watching. I know I did a lot of griping there, but I actually am a big fan of Dark Deeds and Last Hope. And there's actually some other Shadow of the Demon Lord modules I'd like to cover soon. But I am aware that a bunch of you have said that you'd like me to go back to Call of Cthulhu and look at some other modules from Call of Cthulhu. And some others have said that you'd like me to look at the Alien RPG and some modules from there. So I'll probably be doing those before I get around to any more Demon Lord. Of course, my next video will be another RPG deep dive video into the culture. I don't know what, we'll see. But yeah, I've also been making some changes to the channel. I'm using a new camera today, would love to know what you guys think. And I also even hired some lovely voice actors for a couple of bits. You can check out their details in the down below. But I'm just loving this channel, and I'm loving you guys giving me some great feedback on stuff to work on. It's great. So anyway, have a lovely day, and I hope your coming year brings you loads and loads and loads of great gaming.